Please eat something, said Toshiro. It is very traditional English food, from our understanding. Yoko likes it very much. Yoko nodded in agreement before continuing to eat her dinner. Nigel grabbed his fork and very reluctantly took some swede before putting it into his mouth. After chewing and swallowing it, he found nothing wrong with it that he could taste. Ivan could be heard having another coughing fit in the other room before flicking his newspaper. We admire your countryside very much, said Yui. Its beauty is on par with Mount Fuji, but in its own quirky way. Thank you, said Nigel as he thought. No. Something's wrong. Where's Hannah? Where's my girlfriend? Do you mean the young lady with the streak in her hair? Asked Yui. Yes! Yes, where is she? I believe she went for a drink in the bar, said Toshiro. Shipatsu surime ni tareyaku o onzo shinakariba narimesun tomoyo. Slicing right through the tension, Yoko suddenly dropped her fork and started to choke up a little. Nigel looked concerned. Toshiro and Yui became nervous, with Toshiro's brow sweating slightly. She let it down a wrong hole, I think, said Toshiro. Toshiro patted his daughter's back before aggressively grabbing and scrunching the back of her shirt. She tried to resist the urge to continue to choke, which caused a black liquid to start leaking from the middle of her bottom lip. Nigel was disgusted, dropping his fork, standing up, and backing away. She is allergic, we think, Yui nervously proclaimed. Yes, so she is, said Toshiro in an agitated tone. Toshiro hit his daughter's back so hard that she coughed up a half-eaten Yorkshire pudding covered in a thick black liquid with a green shine to it. Nigel was utterly repulsed and took a further step back. Ivan's continued coughing from the other room did not help, as it added further repulsion and tension to the situation. "Oh, that'd make you lose your appetite, wouldn't it, Ben?" yelled Anne with too much enthusiasm. "So it should, love," said Ben. "But not for us." The Raynotts erupted into even bigger and more obnoxious laughter than before. Nigel was confused and scared now, peering into the fixed-up and brightly lit sitting room. He spotted Ivan rather casually sitting on the couch, still reading his paper as he finished his latest coughing fit. Nigel looked back at the hitchhiker. She was completely enveloped in her book and ignoring the Raynotts' latest laughing spree. "Hello," said Nigel as he stepped closer to her. The hitchhiker looked up at Nigel and smiled. "Everything okay?" she said. "Mary Ellis Wright. You are?" "Nigel. Nigel Porter. What the hell is going on here?" "You know, this book is really interesting. It's about that Ian Bray and Myra Hindley." "That's right. See, I love real-world stuff that fucks you up and leaves you a little scared." She turned her attention to the other diners. "Oops! Excuse my language." "No fucking bother, dearie," said Ben in a jokey manner. Anne erupted into more obnoxious laughter with Ben chuckling along. Mary chuckled for a second before resuming her story. "See, it's because I'm such a hiker and an exercise nut," she said. "But I love to be scared while I'm on my journeys in the creepy nighttime because it keeps me on my toes. I especially love England and its rural areas because there's literally nothing rural where I live with my parents for like 25 years, so backpacking is something I literally live for. You could call me a modern-day classic American drifter." The funny thing is, I thought those Manchester moors would be creepy, but try staying at this place. "How long have you been here?" Nigel quietly asked. "A few days. Devon's my next stop. I have a couple grandparents there. Well, everyone usually has a couple of grandparents in one place." Although no one except Toshiro and his wife seemed to notice, Yoko was now extremely nervous, quivering and making whining noises. Ivan's coughing and the Raynotts' obnoxious chewing obscured the whining from Nigel's ears, with his focus being strictly on the Raynotts as he noticed something strange about them that he was still debating in his mind. He asked them how long they had been there for. "Oh, we'd stay here forever if we could, Nigel," said Anne. "Believe me, they feed us well enough," said Ben. Nigel turned to face the Nakamuras once again. You weren't here when I arrived. None of you were. How long have you been here?" Nigel immediately grew concerned upon realising Yoko was making strange noises. He noticed the profuse amount of sweat on her father's forehead as he nervously darted his eyes around the room like a heroin addict having withdrawals. "Gyogi Yoko shimasen ka, Yoko!" barked Yui. Yoko shook her head in disagreement before continuing to whine and quiver. "Poor thing," said Mary. Maybe you should take her to go and get some fresh air. I think that would be good, yes, said Toshiro before standing up. Kaichio Yoko! Toshiro tried and struggled to make his daughter stand up, but she very adamantly refused. To Nigel, she was behaving like an autistic child having a meltdown, something he had previously witnessed 5 years prior during a trip to the emergency room after suffering from a severe kidney stone. Oh, you mustn't take that from her, said Anne. I'd give her a smack if I were you. A bloody good one and all, said Ben. Ivan could be heard coughing before flickering his paper once again. So she will if she doesn't behave, yelled Toshiro. See, I don't believe in corporal punishment, Mary quietly admitted to Nigel, who was still trapped in a state of growing anxiety. That's one thing I don't get about Brits or Japs. How long have you been hitchhiking? Nigel asked Mary before turning to the Nakamuras. And I wouldn't threaten hitting her, it's not... Before Nigel could successfully advise against striking the child, Yoko's struggles became too much for Toshiro, who struck her across the face with brute force, causing her to become silent instantly. Mary widened her eyes and made a face before simply shaking her head and returning to her book. Ivan quietly cleared his throat instead of coughing. The Raynotts chuckled between each other. Shocked by the loudness of the slap and sickened by the Raynotts' twisted humour, Nigel turned to the Yorkshire couple in disgust. You bastards! He yelled. The Raynotts lost their smiles and fell silent almost instantly, looking up at Nigel with dead seriousness. You sick, lousy, fat, pathetic excuses of— Are you better, daughter? Said Toshiro. Ivan could be heard coughing again. Nigel turned back around to face the Nakamuras, who were all now completely calm, including Yoko. Nigel became confused as he failed to have a full grasp on what was going on around him. You could maybe spare a couple of quid for an extra night, could you? Asked Mary. Oh my god, I'm becoming so British. Quid! Few bob for borrow, eh? Said Ben. The Raynotts and Mary started laughing together with Toshiro joining in. Unable to make sense of anything, Nigel dashed out of the dining room and into the sitting room. Ivan continued to read his paper as Nigel darted past. In desperation, Nigel stopped, turned, ran up to Ivan and knelt down beside him. Ivan was taken aback, quickly throwing the paper aside and jumping back in his seat in reaction, with a disgruntled look on his face. Have you lost your bloody mind, you? Barked Ivan. Please, sir, what the hell is going on? Asked Nigel. They're a stupid crowd, aren't they? I've had just about enough of them, personally. With the direction this country's going, and I'm not surprised these idiots think they can act the way they do. And I'm not surprised you do either. Now get away from me! But I don't understand! 1 minute this place is as vacant and ruined as an old church, and then there's all these people and the decor is fixed and— I pay good money not to be disturbed! All I ask is that I be allowed to enjoy what little time off I have away from my job and my family, so if you have a problem, you take it up with the front desk. Good evening! But good evening, sir! Ivan picked up his paper and obscured his face with it. Defeated, Nigel jumped up and ran towards the main hall. Ivan coughed a little once again. As Nigel left, however, he realised something that he thought was unusual from the moment he got a good look at everyone, and it was confirmed with the intense eye contact he had with Ivan before being rudely dismissed. They all had bright, shiny green eyes that felt piercingly dark in how they looked at Nigel's plain brown eyes. In the main hall, Nigel encountered a 19-year-old inn maid. She was a quiet and timid woman dressed in the typical black and white maid uniform, and, as with the guests, she had bright green shiny eyes like emeralds. She was cleaning the chairs in what was now a completely fixed up and clean main hall. With pure frustration, Nigel attempted to use the door leading out underneath the arch, but it was locked. He spooked the maid as he banged it with both hands like a mad ape against enclosure glass. It's locked for the night, sir, said the maid in a very timid manner. I can see that, Nigel angrily replied. Nigel stormed back straight through the sitting room and back into the dining room. Mary and the Nakamuras were completely calm and eating quietly, while Anne and Ben continued to obnoxiously pig out, with Anne being genuinely startled by Nigel running straight past and accidentally injuring himself by hitting her chair. Ooh, he better not run that fast if he wants to find what he's looking for, said Anne. Otherwise he'll hurt himself. Why is everything so funny to you? Barked Nigel as he turned to face the Raynott couple. Why can't you just shut up? The room fell silent. The Nakamuras ignored Nigel's outburst, continuing to drink and eat. Mary awkwardly batted her eyes up at Nigel before looking straight back at her morbid book. Anne and Ben fell silent and looked almost as if they had genuinely been put in their place. Within mere seconds, however, they slowly started to grin and chuckle at each other. Mary started to snicker and laugh as well, prompting Nigel to angrily look at her. She then grabbed a sausage with her fork and threw it at Nigel, who dodged it. Yoko began to chuckle as well, prompting Toshiro to drop his knife and fork and whack Yoko over the back of the head, causing her to whimper. Infuriated, Nigel stormed up the stairs at high speed, running through the upstairs hall, storming through the middle hall, and making his way straight into the entry hall. Nigel was greeted by yet another perfectly done-up area that was once disastrously filthy, with the shelving units for the mail full of letters and packages for the guests, the board of keys empty as all rooms had been taken, and the doors and windows where they should be. Nigel was still anxious to the point he did not even notice the man calmly standing behind the desk with his hands behind his back, saying nothing as he stared at Nigel. The man was a pale, slender character with fuzzy red hair like a simian, bony hands, and a permanent creepy grin. His eyes were also green like the guests and the maid, but they were eerily sunken and dark, giving his face the same features as a skull. His teeth were small and, like his gums, slightly stained black, as though he ate charcoal instead of normal meals 3 times a day. He was dressed smartly enough in a completely black three-piece with heavy boots and a white ascot obscuring his pencil-thin neck. "May I help you, sir?" said the man. Nigel spun around to face the man with surprise. The man grinned at Nigel, setting an instant feeling of complete unease in Nigel's mind. To him, the inn began to feel as derelict and cold as it did when he first entered. "You seem confused, sir. I'm Sebastian, the innkeeper. What room are you staying in?" The man spoke with a false sincerity that irritated Nigel, who could detect beyond reasonable doubt that this Sebastian, even though they had only just met, was a deceitful and cruel character hiding it behind his staged consideration for others. "I'm not staying here," said Nigel. "No?" said Sebastian. "I have you here in my ledger." Sebastian opened the aforementioned ledger and flipped through it. Nigel approached the desk. The innkeeper batted his eyes up towards Nigel and immediately back down at the ledger, pointing his bony finger specifically at Nigel's full name written in Nigel's handwriting, asking him to confirm if it was in fact him. Nigel had no response other than to stare at the man in disbelief. "And you're staying with Hannah Glazer, correct?" "Where is she?" Nigel hissed. "Be calm, my friend. I understand you left your luggage behind in your vehicle out on the road. Why don't I send—"
"Where is my girlfriend? Where's the little girl we found?"
"Girl? What girl?"
"Meredith. She lives here. She led us here."
"You must know a girl who's been living at your inn like a scared and homeless orphan for
God knows how long."
"Ah, you mean the little Downs girl?"
"Yes,
You aren't playing with little girls, are you, Nigel?" Nigel was beyond shocked and insulted, preparing himself to rail into the ape-like twig with ferocious verbal combat.
"Excuse me!"
Nigel barked. "Perhaps you enjoy chasing little girls," said Sebastian with a truly smug and abominably creepy smirk.
"Look here, you disrespectful—"
"A mere joke, Mr. Porter. Don't fret. We have a dark sense of humour in these distant lands. We aren't like you city folk. We like to joke. Why don't you—"
"I don't find this very funny, sir. In fact, I find it deeply disturbing."
"If you allow my good friend and trusted servant Hunch to retrieve your things from your vehicle, I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable here at the Green Horse Inn."
"Hello, sir,"
said a strange, unfamiliar voice from behind Nigel. Startled, Nigel jumped as he turned to face the aforementioned Hunch, putting a hand to his chest and sighing with frustration at having been scared by the man's voice alone. His physical appearance wasn't to be taken lightly either. Although he was no older than his late 20s, Hubert Anthony was a creepy hunchback with dry skin, dirty nails, ragged clothes, discoloured eyes, one green and one reddish brown, and a strange, creepy, heavily accented voice enunciated by his dry sense of humour. His mannerisms were vaguely similar to Albert Steptoe, a character Nigel watched on television many times as a child but had forgotten about until that point.
"Scared you, did I?"
said Hunch.
"You hadn't even looked at me yet,
Hunch laughed creepily to himself. Sebastian shared the laughter with a genuinely creepy tilt back of his head while he grinned and grasped the desk firmly as if he was aroused. "Give us your keys and I'll go and retrieve your belongings," said Hunch. "Why would I trust you with such a thing?" asked Nigel. "I don't even know you." While Nigel didn't notice, Sebastian began to reach out so he could caress Nigel's shoulder with his finger like a spider's leg. "Do you think such a shameful, crippled creature as I could even bother to steal or drive away, sir? Eh?" Hunch began to chuckle to himself in a wheezy, breathless way while Sebastian's finger got closer to Nigel's shoulder. "You don't have such a steel mind, eh, sir? Eh?" Sebastian began to gently stroke Nigel's shoulder with his finger. Nigel was startled by the sudden touch, causing him to jump away and grasp his shoulder. Sebastian quickly returned to standing straight and grasping the desk firmly as he continued to smile at Nigel with his toothy grin. Hunch walked closer to Nigel. Nigel took one step away but ultimately allowed the hunchback to get closer when he realised he didn't want to be too close to Sebastian either. Hunch then held out his filthy hand. "Think, eh? When will I have to keep on living? I would try and get away with that, sir. I'll be caught and hanged before I even have time to find the key in the thin, sir. The thin, you know? Here's your keys." Nigel was hesitant. Feeling almost threatened by the two, he begrudgingly checked for his keys. He couldn't find them and quickly came to a realisation. "Hannah has my keys," he said. "I gave them to Hannah, she has them." "You best go and find her, Hunch," said Sebastian. "I believe she's in the bar." "Right," said Hunch. He turned to Nigel. "This way then, sir. This way then, sir." Nigel reluctantly followed as Hunch led the way to the inn bar. Sebastian continued to grin until Nigel aggressively closed the door, separating the two areas behind him, after which Sebastian's grin instantly disappeared and a scowl formed on his face. He violently slammed the ledger shut. Nigel looked back at the door upon hearing the loud bang. He then turned to face the bar and, as expected, it was completely normal and practically spotless, with the barman standing behind the bar polishing a mug with a cloth. The one true relief Nigel had was seeing Hannah drinking a large glass of red wine sitting in the corner with Meredith and 3 other people, a middle-aged woman, a middle-aged man, and an elderly woman who was hunched over with closed eyes. "Hannah!" said Nigel before promptly running over. Hunch remained by the bar and slammed his fist on it 3 times. The barman gave Hunch a nod and started pouring a pint of Mackerel stout. Nigel took a seat at the table of 5 as the latest guest. The first slightly unusual thing Nigel noticed about Hannah was that while her eyes were still primarily their normal colour, they had a slight green tinge to them that he knew for a fact they didn't have before. "Hello, Nigel," said Hannah with subtle nervousness in her voice. "How are you doing?" I'm fine. Where have you... What's going on?" said Nigel. Who are these people?" "Do forgive me, sir," said the man. "I am David, and this is my wife, Lily. We're Meredith's parents. This is my lovely mother, Abigail. And obviously, you're Nigel." Nigel took a moment to analyse the strange trio of people he had never seen before. David Downs, no older than 45, had a deep voice, although it was a friendly one. He was a green-eyed, fuzzy black-haired farmer with a flat cap, dressed in full tweed straight out of the 1940s. Lily Downs, based on looks alone, was a 30-something, quiet, compassionate woman who seemed to care deeply about her daughter, holding an arm around her the entire time Nigel looked at her. She was slightly pudgy with bright blonde hair, green eyes, and, like her husband, dressed straight out of the late 1940s in a farmer's wife's attire. Abigail Downs, however, was clearly reaching her mid-70s, no younger than 75. She was wrapped tightly in a cloak in a similar fashion to how her granddaughter was earlier. Her eyes were shut as though she was sleeping, but she was sitting up and seemed to be with it. Instead of aggravating the situation, Nigel remained calm. Meredith still looked a little scared and cold, but she seemed far less so than earlier, as if she did at least recognise the people she was sitting with. "Yes, said Nigel before trailing off as he focused his attention on Meredith. "Meredith, do you definitely know these people?" Meredith opened her mouth to speak before abruptly stopping, perhaps prompted by her mother clenching her hand on her daughter's shoulder slightly. Meredith nodded, although Nigel was not convinced, immediately thereafter noticing that Lily looked just as scared as her daughter did. "We could run home to get her birth certificate and passport if you like," chuckled David. Nigel diverted his attention to David for a second before looking straight back at Lily, who now had a very pleasant smile on her face. Nigel was somewhat calmed down by this, but remained suspicious. He looked at the old woman, a little confused by her pose that seemed to contradict her resting face. The barman finished pouring the stout after letting it settle and slammed it on the bar for Hunch, who grabbed it and took a gulp as he wobbled over to the table. "Meredith told us you looked after her last night when she got a little lost," said David. "We're more than glad to buy you a drink or two." "Well, said Nigel. Hunch nudged the back of Nigel's shoulder several times with the back of his hand, prompting an angered Nigel to turn around at rapid speed and be instantly put off by having the deformed hunchback so close to his face. "Here's your keys," said Hunch as he held his filthy hand out. "I've found her now," said Nigel very firmly. "We'll go and get our things ourselves when we see fit." No, good sir. Can't let you be doing that. Bad business. Bad. Master won't be happy, eh?" "Well, that's too bad." Now, steady on, Nigel," said David. "He's harmless enough, and he's only doing his job." "Yes, Nigel, it's fine," said Hannah, forcing herself not to sound too scared. Hannah took the car keys out of her pocket. Hunch perked up a little and grinned slightly. He wiggled his fingers about, clearly overly excited at the prospect of obtaining the keys. Nigel was incredibly disturbed by the whole thing, especially his own partner's willingness to give in to such a creepish man's demands. "No!" Nigel snapped as he grabbed the keys off of Hannah, pocketing them and turning to Hunch. "Would you kindly leave us alone?" Annoyed by this, Hunch snarled at Nigel like a dog before turning around, walking back over to the bar and taking a seat on one of the stools. Nigel noticed the barman giving him a firm and grumpy look as if he was ready to throw Nigel out of a window, prompting Nigel to nervously turn back to the table. "Well, I can't argue with a man who's not wanting help with his belongings," said David. "I commend it. I'd have carried my own stuff myself if Hunch weren't so polite." "Oh, they've been ever so good to us," said Lily. "Meredith here has had a wonderful time, haven't you, darling?" Meredith nodded but still looked uncertain. Nigel caught on to this before looking at the old woman who still had her eyes closed and remained hunched over, clearly not comfortable and perhaps not even conscious. Nigel then looked at Hannah, who had a genuine look of fear in her eyes. Outside in the pen by the courtyard, the goats Hunch guided into it were bleating, jumping around and playfully headbutting one another like mildly aggressive children in a playground. They sounded calm and careless as goats left to roam a pen should be. In the stable, however, the green horse that gave the inn its namesake was eerily quiet and still. It started smacking its lips while it stared dead ahead at nothing, almost autonomous in its stillness. The wind slowly became stronger, blowing harshly with an icy coldness. The horse then stopped smacking its lips and started to growl like a wolf targeting its prey. The goats began to hear the sharp and strong wind continue to eerily pick up, sensing something wrong in the barn. They became erratic, bleating more heavily and moaning. One of them raised its upper body and kicked in the air, almost as if it was in protest of what was to come. Back in the bar, the sound of goats bleating increasingly loudly in desperation and the wind howling could be heard, adding a chilling coldness to the room that lacked any heating beyond the illusion of warmth coming from the candles hanging on the walls. Nigel tried to ignore it and focused his look on David rather suspiciously, but no amount of focus could distract him from the feeling of the hairs on the back of his neck standing tall as he resisted the urge to shiver. "How long have you been here?" Nigel asked suspiciously. "Why, about a month now," said David. "It's practically paradise here. It might not seem like much, but it's comfortable. That and we don't have to work anymore. And Mother is well looked after. Aren't you, Mother?" The old woman said nothing, although her lips began to twitch and her fist clenched several times as if she desperately wanted to. David became a little nervous and laughed awkwardly in an attempt to brush off his mother's unusual behaviour. She never has much to say, he said. Abigail let out a whimper and raised her hands. She slowly opened her eyes, revealing to be blank, deep green eyes without irises or pupils. Nigel leaned back in horror. He looked at Hannah. Her eyes began to tear up as she looked back at Nigel. Meredith very solemnly looked at him as well. "Oh, Jesus, Nye," said Hannah. "I'm sorry," said Meredith in a very remorseful tone. Within the stable, the horse growled and snarled as its eyes began to glow green. It made an uncanny, angry face like a realistically designed cartoon that no regular horse would be capable of making. The goats in the pen became completely bonkers, with one of them desperately trying to climb over the pen's fence to escape. It was unsuccessful and fell back onto the ground like a helpless child before instantly trying to escape its sacrificial prison once again.